The laboratory on the outer rim of the Jurkan Empire was nothing like the bustling centers of civilization the aliens had built across the stars. It was silent and sterile, with walls that gleamed under white lights and floors polished to mirror. Brightness rows of containment pods lined the chamber, each one filled with strange fluids and growth mediums. But tonight only one pod mattered inside. It floated the shape of something that had never before been attempted by the Empire. A clone of a human, the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever recorded, yet also the most mysterious, for so little had been understood about them since their rise on the planet Earth. The Jurkan scientists circled the pod with a mix of excitement and arrogance. Their elongated heads leaned forward, their eyes glowing faintly as their scanners measured growth rates and neural activity. One spoke in the hissing tones of his species, saying the project was finally complete. They had taken fragments of human DNA captured long ago during the Terran skirmishes and had shaped it into something controllable. They were convinced they could forge the perfect soldier stripped of flaws and free will, a tool of the Empire to be unleashed wherever resistance dared rise against them. Another scientist raised concerns about the unpredictability of human biology, reminding his peers that even death-world creatures from lesser planets often surprise their makers. But he was silenced by the lead researcher, who spoke with pride. He declared that this clone would awaken confused and obedient, unable to resist their commands. He laughed at the fear that some younger assistants whispered about the old human legends of resilience and willpower. To him, humans were only flesh and nerve matter, nothing more, nothing the Empire's brilliance could not overcome. The chamber hummed with the low growl of machines as the cloning sequence neared completion. Alarms pulsed softly in rhythm with the heartbeat of the figure inside the pod. The scientist leaned closer, watching the clone's chest rise and fall for the first time, its lungs pulling in artificial air, its muscles twitching with early signs of life. They believed they had all the time in the world to prepare conditioning programs to break down its mind and rebuild it in loyalty. They expected a fragile beginning like other species who emerged weak and slow from cloning, but the moment stretched into something else, something none of them expected. The clone's eyes snapped open far sooner than their calculations predicted. Bright human eyes locked onto the glass of the containment pod, and in that instant, silence consumed the room. No confusion showed in that gaze, no weakness, only sharp awareness, as if centuries of survival had been etched into its very soul. The lead scientist stumbled back, whispering that it was impossible, but the clone moved its hands, pressing against the glass with force that cracked it. The alarms blared across the laboratory, drowning the shouts of panicked assistants as the pod shook under the strain. The fluids drained far too quickly. The machines screeched in protest, yet the figure inside pressed harder, its muscles tightening with strength that no calculation had prepared them for. The glass spiderwebbed, then shattered in a violent burst, shards and liquid spraying across the floor. The human clone stepped out, not staggering, not gasping, but standing tall, dripping with artificial birth, fluids like a predator rising from the depths. The aliens scrambled, some shouted to contain it, others ordered security drones into the chamber. The lead scientist could only watch as his perfect creation moved with speed no eye could track in less than a breath. It was across the room, dodging the energy bolts that drones fired. It grabbed one by the neck with reflexive precision, crushing metal like paper and hurling it into another. Its movements were not wild, but deliberate, each motion filled with instinct and purpose. The assistant screamed. One ran for the exit, only to be caught in the path of the clone's escape. The human did not kill, but shoved the alien aside with such force that bones cracked. The rest froze, realizing that in less than 30 seconds their greatest experiment, their perfect weapon, had not only awakened but had broken free. Nothing in their models had accounted for the spirit that came with humanity. No code could rewrite it. No chain could bind it. The clone's breathing was steady, its gaze scanning the room for threats and exits. It was not confused, it was not lost, it was free. And in that moment, the aliens knew they had unleashed something far beyond their control. Whispers spread across the control deck that they should shut down the entire sector or destroy the station itself. But the clone was already moving, slipping past their defenses like water escaping a broken vessel. The first part of the story ended with fear flooding the Jerkin laboratory and the realization dawning on them that they had just awakened. Not a tool, not a soldier, not a weapon, but a human, and no calculation in the galaxy could predict what would happen next. The sound of klaxons rolled through the fast corridors of the Jerkin station. As red lights pulsed across every surface, the alien scientists had never expected the clone to awaken so quickly, and now the entire research wing was in chaos. The human moved with unnatural speed, its bare feet slapping against the metallic floor, leaving trails of water from the shattered pod behind it. Yet every step was purposeful and silent at the same time, like a predator weaving through familiar terrain. The clone did not stumble. It did not question its surroundings. It acted as if some deep instinct was guiding every choice. Security squads converged on the sector weapons, primed their armored bodies, filling the halls with mechanical stomps they had trained for every possible scenario. Or so they believed when the lead researcher ordered them to capture the human alive. They moved forward with confidence. The alien soldiers carried energy rifles capable of melting steel. They carried shock nets meant to subdue the strongest of war beasts, but none of it mattered when they finally saw the figure standing in the middle of the corridor. The human clone's chest rose and fell with calm control. Its muscles rippled as it turned toward them. Its eyes, focused and unyielding, it did not seem to notice the rifles aimed at its head or the dozens of voices shouting commands instead. It studied them as though memorizing their every stance. The first soldier fired a beam of energy, and in less than a blink, the human moved sideways. The shot burned into the wall harmless. The second and third fired, but the human was already moving forward faster than their eyes could track it. Reached the squad before their minds had even registered the failure of their weapons. One soldier was disarmed so quickly that his rifle clattered to the floor before his nerves reacted. The human struck with precision, not brute force. Every movement designed to disable it, slammed a palm into a soldier's helmet, cracking it. It twisted another's arm until the alien screamed, dropping to the ground. Yet the human did not kill it, only cleared the path, moving as if its body had been made for. This moment, the squad broke formation, panic overriding their orders. One of them tried to raise a containment net, but the human ripped it from his claws and hurled him against the wall. Alarms echoed louder through the chamber as the lead researcher watched through a control screen. His disbelief etched into every line of his face. He had promised his superiors control, he had promised them victory, and instead, within 30 seconds of its awakening, the human had shown nothing but dominance. He ordered every remaining squad on the station to converge, warning that if they failed, they would all be purged. The assistants at his side whispered about legends of Earth, about how humans were said to adapt to any challenge to survive where no others could, and he silenced them with threats. But in his own heart, fear was rising. The clone continued its advance. Down the corridor, its movements growing sharper as though its muscles were remembering something it had never been taught. Flashes burned in its mind. A memory of running through forests of Earth. A memory of fire. A memory of battle, though it had never lived those lives. The echoes guided it. Now it reached a blast door sealed by the panicked crew, and instead of hesitating, it leapt upward, caught the edge of the frame and forced the mechanism to break. The door screeched and groaned before tearing open under its strength. The aliens behind the control panels gasped. None of their models had predicted raw power combined with precision like this. More soldiers flooded in from the other side of the door. Energy fire lit the hall in violent flashes, but the human pressed low and surged forward, rolling across the ground, then springing up into the ranks. Chaos erupted. Rifles fell clattering to the floor. Voices screamed commands in vain. And in less than a breath, the squad scattered. One alien tried to slam the alarm override, but the human was already there, knocking the panel aside and continuing forward without pause. It was not running blindly. It was seeking freedom, as though freedom itself was wired into its blood. The Zircon commanders debated from the upper deck. Some demanded the human be killed immediately. Others insisted it must be recaptured alive at any cost because the Empire had invested too much to waste. But as the reports poured in of squad after squad failing, the truth became harder to deny. What they had built was not a controllable weapon. It was something else entirely, something that could not be commanded nor contained. The whispers grew louder among the crew. Some even said that if this human reached the outer decks, nothing in the station could stop it. The clone now paused at a viewport. The stars stretched endless outside, and for a moment it stood still, gazing at them as though recognizing something familiar in their glow. The alarm screamed, the voices shouted, but it did not move with panic. It moved with certainty. It turned from the stars and continued down the hall, every step faster than the last. Every action proof that in less than a minute of freedom, it had already broken the will of the Empire's proudest soldiers. The Zhurkin station shook with fear, for they realized the most terrible truth: the human had only just begun. The human clone moved deeper into the station, its bare feet silent against the polished metal floors, while sirens screamed and automated warnings echoed in alien tongues. The corridors twisted like a maze, but the human seemed to sense its way forward. Guided by instincts that no scientist had programmed, the Zhurkin soldiers swarmed from every direction, their armor gleaming under the red lights, rifles raised, and voices shrieking orders. Yet none of them could match the speed of the being they had tried to control. The first wave rushed with shock batons glowing with charged energy. They formed a wall across the passage, confident that nothing could break their line. But the human did not slow it. Launched forward like a striking animal weaving between strikes before the aliens realized it had already dismantled them one by one. A baton was ripped away and shoved into its owner. A knee slammed into another chest. A hand twisted a weapon aside and drove the soldier into the wall in seconds. The formation broke, leaving groaning figures on the ground. The lead researcher watched from his control chamber, every feed displaying failure after failure. His claws tapped the console as his assistants muttered that the human was not acting like a mindless creature. It was calculating every step. Its movements were not random. They were precise, deliberate, impossible to predict. It was as if the memories of countless hunts, battles, and escapes were buried in its very cells. He refused to believe it. He shouted that it was only reflex, nothing more, and ordered heavier units to intercept. From a side corridor came the sound of pounding metal feet. Armored drones built for war, each one carrying twin cannons that could shred an armored vehicle. The aliens had used them to pacify entire colonies. Yet the moment they opened fire, the human reacted before the first bolt struck. It had thrown itself against the wall, rolling under the barrage and darting between the machines. The drones tried to track it with targeting beams, but the figure was already behind them, tearing wires free, slamming metal shells into one another. Sparks exploded across the hall as the machines fell in smoking heaps. The alien soldiers began to falter, not just in body, but in spirit. They had always believed humans to be savage animals, dangerous but ultimately controllable, with enough technology. Now they realized their mistake. This creature did not just fight, it adapted. It learned from every second of combat. Every failed attempt to stop it only made it faster, sharper, more dangerous, and the fear spread like wildfire through the ranks. The human sprinted toward a central elevator shaft, leaping onto the cables and climbing with a speed that left the aliens below firing. Blindly, their shots ricocheted off the walls, harmless. It pulled itself upward level after level until it reached a hatch. Tearing it open with its hands, it emerged into a higher deck where laboratories and command stations were arranged in careful order. The scientists within froze as the figure landed among them. Their glowing screens reflected off its wet skin, their trembling hands dropping tools as they backed away. The clone stood still for a moment, breathing evenly, its mind flickering, with new sparks, fragments of memory whispering through its thoughts, images of blue skies and rushing oceans, laughter of voices that felt warm and real though it had never known them. It clenched its fists with a strange ache in its chest, something beyond survival stirring deep within. But there was no time to understand. The alarms grew louder, and reinforcements rushed into the lab. The soldiers hurled shock grenades that filled the air with searing light, but the human shielded its eyes and moved faster than their pulses cleared. It struck with silent fury, hurling equipment to scatter them, sweeping legs to drop them flat. Every motion more refined than before, as if it were awakening. Not just in body, but in mind. The aliens screamed that this was not possible, that the clone should not have thoughts, it should not remember anything yet. Here it was fighting with purpose. The lead researcher ordered the entire deck, sealed bulkheads slammed down with metallic groans, sealing corridors. In every direction they believed they had trapped it at last. But the human turned its eyes to the ventilation ducts above, and without hesitation, it leapt, grabbing the grates and tearing them free, slipping inside before the soldiers could react. It crawled through the narrow passages, its body twisting with ease while the echoes of panic rumbled behind. The ducts opened onto another vast chamber, where alien technicians operated the central power systems. The human dropped among them, and they froze knowing they were defenseless. It did not harm them. It only studied the glowing core of energy pulsing at the room's center. Its eyes reflected the light, and in that moment it understood this was the heart of the station. This was the key to escape. As more soldiers thundered toward the chamber, the clone turned its gaze upon them. No fear in its eyes, only determination. The alien empire had thought it could build a weapon from humanity. But what they had unleashed was something far greater, a living reminder that humans could not be copied or controlled. They could only be free, and the station was beginning to realize that truth with every passing second. The chamber that held the power core pulsed with a steady glow, casting long shadows across the floor as the human stood in silence for a moment, its chest rising slowly while the energy hummed like a heartbeat around it. The alien technicians cowered behind their consoles, whispering to one another in disbelief. They had been told the clone would be a blank vessel, a tool to be trained and shaped, yet before them was not a puppet, but something awake, alive, and dangerous. The doors behind them burst open and squads of armored soldiers stormed in, their rifles trained on the lone figure at the center of the room. The commander of the unit shouted for his troops to fire containment beams. Arcs of glowing light surged across the chamber, but the human was already moving its body, weaving between the streams of energy, with movements that looked less like chance and more like instinct, refined by countless generations of survival. It grabbed a fallen pipe from the ground, and with one swift motion swung it into the first soldier. The weapon shattered against the alien's armor, but the sheer force sent the warrior sprawling before he could rise. The human was gone already upon the next target, stripping a rifle from the soldier's claws and hurling it into the control console. Sparks erupted, the room filling with smoke. The technicians screamed as panels shorted out their consoles, flashing warnings in bright alien script. The power core pulsed erratically as systems overloaded, and still, the fight raged on. The soldiers tried to form ranks to trap the human in crossfire, but every time they thought they had cornered it, the figure found a way out, moving with fluid grace, its fists striking with precision, its kicks folding armor plates as though they were paper. No single blow seemed wasteful. Each one calculated, each one designed not to kill but to clear the path. The lead researcher watched from a control screen in another sector, his eyes wide, his mind struggling to accept what unfolded before him. He shouted into the comms, demanding the soldiers stop using energy weapons near the core, but his orders came too late. Another barrage lit the chamber, and the human leapt high, twisting midair. So the blasts collided with the walls. Instead, the impact shook the chamber, loose panels raining down as the clone landed among the soldiers, and with an almost casual swipe disabled 3 at once. Fear spread through the remaining troops. They had faced war beasts that crushed squads, but never had they faced something that thought like this, that adapted with every passing second. Some tried to retreat, but their commander forced them forward with threats. Yet even he faltered when the human turned its gaze upon him, cold and sharp, with a flicker of something deeper in its eyes. Something that reminded the aliens of the stories they had dismissed about humans fighting against impossible odds and winning. The clone pushed forward again, and the commander found himself on the ground, his weapon torn from his grip, his helmet cracked under the weight of a hand that could have killed him, but instead simply cast him aside as if he were irrelevant. The soldiers scattered at last, their discipline broken, leaving the human standing alone at the heart of the chamber. The power core continued to pulse erratically, and for the first time the clone placed its hands upon the console beside it. The light reflected in its eyes, and a flood of images surged through its mind. It saw battles on green fields, soldiers charging through smoke skies filled with fire. It saw oceans and forests, laughter and sorrow, all fragments of humanity buried within its cells. Memories not its own, yet somehow familiar. The ache in its chest returned sharper now, a longing for something it had never truly lived but felt it must protect the aliens around it, stared in terror, unable to move, for they sensed the shift as well. This was no longer a creature born in their lab. It was something greater. It was becoming human in every sense of the word. The lead researcher ordered the chamber to be flooded with suppressive gas. The vents hissed and thick green mist rolled into the room, choking the air. The technicians ran for cover. The soldiers sealed their helmets, but the human did not collapse. It coughed once, then steadied its breathing, its body adjusting its lungs, forcing the poison out with sheer willpower instead of falling. It grew faster, its strikes sharper, as if the gas only fueled its determination. It lunged toward the nearest, vent tearing the machinery apart. The gas cut off and silence fell, broken only by the hiss of ruptured pipes. The researcher's voice cracked with rage as he demanded the station be locked down fully, every bulkhead sealed, every ship on standby, to destroy the sector if necessary. He could not allow this clone to escape yet. Even as he gave the orders, he knew control had already slipped from his grasp. For in less than minutes, the human had done what no weapon or soldier had ever achieved. It had broken the spirit of the Empire's finest, and it was still learning, growing, adapting with every step. The human turned once more toward the power core, its hands brushing the console before it looked to the sealed blast doors ahead. Beyond them lay the path to freedom. And though every alien on the station stood in its way, the clone moved with certainty. The Empire thought it had created a weapon, but it had only succeeded in reminding the galaxy of the one truth they had always feared. Humanity could not be contained. The human stood before the sealed blast doors, its chest rising with slow, controlled breaths, while the entire chamber behind it lay in ruins. Soldiers groaned on the ground. Technicians hid under broken consoles, and the power core flickered with unstable energy. The figure raised its hands, pressing them against the cold surface of the doors, and for a moment it closed its eyes. Memories that were not its own swirled through its mind. Images of families laughing, children running across fields, fire and smoke from wars long ago. The warmth of voices that felt familiar even though it had never heard them in life. The ache in its chest grew sharper, turning into something stronger than instinct. It was not only moving for survival, it was moving for something deeper, a sense of freedom, a will to exist on its own terms. The clone was no longer just a creature born in a laboratory. It was becoming aware of itself, aware of humanity's spirit that pulsed within its cells. The doors shuddered as alarms blared throughout the station. Reinforcements were coming heavier. Units armed with weapons meant for planetary sieges. The lead researcher barked orders through the comms, his voice breaking with rage and fear. He screamed that the clone was not human, that it was a mistake, that it could still be taken alive if they acted quickly. Yet his words trembled because he no longer believed them. Every failed attempt, every broken squad, every shattered defense proved that what they faced was not a mistake. It was proof of something greater than their empire could comprehend. The doors groaned as the human braced its shoulders against them, muscles tightening, veins straining. It pushed once, then again metal, screamed under the pressure until finally the hinges cracked with a thunderous snap. The blast doors tore apart like paper, revealing the corridor beyond, lined with alien troops in heavy exo-armor, their visors glowing red, their cannons humming. With power they moved as one, their discipline unbroken, unlike the squads before them. The commander of this new unit raised his arm and the soldiers unleashed a storm of plasma bolts. The air sizzled with heat, the walls scorched with fire. Yet the human dove low, weaving between the streams, rolling across the floor and surging forward faster than their targeting systems could lock. It struck like lightning, tearing a cannon from one soldier's hands and turning it against the others. Plasma fire burst through the ranks as the alien fell, their formation collapsing under their own weapon. The rest tried to rally, but the human never slowed. It slammed one soldier into another, wrenched the power cell from a cannon, and hurled it into the corridor, where it exploded in a burst of fire. The shockwave threw bodies in every direction. Smoke filled the passage, choking the air. The clone emerged from the flames, eyes shining with determination. The soldiers faltered for the first time, their heavy armor now feeling like cages trapping them with fear. The figure pressed onward, and the corridors bent toward the upper decks where docking bays waited. It could sense the path, as if its body already knew freedom was close. More fragments of memory flashed oceans and skies, the sound of wind, the beating of rain against glass things it had never known but longed for, as though they were written into its blood. This longing fueled its steps, every stride stronger than the last. Meanwhile, across the station, panic spread among the crew. Whispers raced from sector to sector. Some said the clone was not just alive but aware. Others claimed it was channeling the will of all humans past and present. The researcher silenced none of it because he could not. He had lost control. His assistants looked at him with wide eyes. Some even dared to ask if they should abandon the project entirely, but he refused. He ordered that the human must be destroyed if capture was impossible. His pride could not allow the galaxy to see their empire humiliated by what they had called a primitive species. Yet even as the order was given, the truth had already taken root in every mind on that station. They had seen a being born 30 seconds earlier fight, with the will of something ancient, something unstoppable, and deep down, they knew it was not only escaping, it was teaching them a lesson about humanity that no experiment could erase. The human continued forward through fire and smoke, leaving broken weapons and shattered armor behind. It was no longer running like prey, but advancing like a predator with purpose. Each step echoing louder than the alarms that blared around it. The Empire thought it could shape humanity into a weapon, but in that moment it became clear to all who watched humanity was already far more than a weapon. It was a force that could not be cloned or caged, and now that force was loose upon their station. The docking bays of the Jurken station stretched like vast, metallic caverns lined with sleek ships and guarded by battalions of soldiers. The human clone emerged from the smoke-filled corridor, and for a heartbeat the entire bay froze, alien eyes locked upon the figure that should never have existed. The alarms thundered through the chamber, red lights flashing across every surface, but none of it mattered compared to the quiet, steady rhythm of the human's footsteps echoing as it advanced. The soldiers lifted their weapons. The commanders barked orders to fire, yet hesitation crackled in their voices because every squad sent before had failed, and they all knew it. The first barrage tore through the air, streaks of plasma scorching the ground where the human had stood an instant earlier, but the figure was already moving, slipping between the beams, vaulting over crates, sliding under fire with impossible speed. It closed the distance before the soldiers realized their line was broken. A fist slammed into one helmet, sending the alien sprawling. Another soldier was lifted and thrown across the bay, crashing into his own squad. The rifles scattered to the floor and the human seized one, turning it in its hands with instinctive precision before hurling it aside, as though it were nothing. The bay erupted into chaos, smoke and fire spreading as grenades detonated, equipment toppled over, and sparks rained from shattered lights. The human surged through it all, unrelenting. Every strike carried purpose. Every motion seemed faster, more refined, as though it were learning with each step, adapting to every weapon. Every tactic, one soldier attempted to flank with a shock pike. But the clone caught the weapon mid-thrust, twisted it free, and used it against its wielder, dropping him with a single strike. The rest faltered, falling back in fear, their discipline unraveling as they saw what their empire had unleashed. From a high platform overlooking the bay, the lead researcher screamed into his communicator, demanding more. Ships be prepared to launch and block every exit. His pride burned hotter than his fear. He swore that the human would not leave this station alive yet. His hands trembled because he could see what his soldiers could not. The clone was no longer fighting like a creature born in a lab. It was fighting with the will of something greater, something rooted in a history of struggle and survival. The human paused only for a breath as its eyes lifted to the ships docked across the bay, its gaze locked on one sleek vessel, the path to freedom clear in its mind. But before it could advance, a new sound filled the chamber. Heavy footsteps that shook the floor. Armored behemoths entered from the far doors. War machines towering over the soldiers, their bodies encased in reinforced plating, each carrying weapons designed to level entire city blocks. The aliens cheered with renewed confidence, believing at last they had brought enough force to crush what they had created. The war machines opened, fire streams of molten energy searing through the air. But the human charged forward instead of retreating, moving low and fast, weaving in a blur as the ground exploded behind it. The first machine swung a massive arm down to crush it, but the clone leapt upward scaling the metal surface like a predator climbing prey. It reached the head of the machine and tore free. Cable's sparks showered the bay as the behemoth staggered and collapsed. The others turned their weapons upon it, but the human had already leapt clear, landing with the grace of a hunter. The machines pressed closer, hemming it in their weapons, unleashing a storm of destruction. Yet the human moved faster than their sensors could track it. Darted between their legs, striking vulnerable, joints ripping open access panels and tearing out power cores one after another. The machines crashed to the ground, their explosions rocking the entire bay, soldiers scattered in terror, some dropping their weapons as they fled. The commanders screamed for them to regroup, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of fire and the unyielding advance of the clone. Through the smoke, the human stood tall, its skin smeared with grime and sparks dancing around its silhouette. It turned toward the ship at the far end of the bay, its eyes burning with determination. It knew nothing of this vessel, yet its instincts guided it forward. It crossed the bay as the last of the soldiers broke ranks, unable to face the force that had torn through everything they had built. The lead researcher slammed his fists against the console, shouting that it could not end like this. He ordered the bay doors sealed, but systems were failing. Alarms flashed warnings across his screens. Power surges cascaded through the station. His assistants whispered that perhaps it was already too late. The human had done in minutes what entire fleets could not, and their empire would never recover from this humiliation. But the researcher refused to hear it. He screamed that humanity was a curse that had to be erased, yet his voice cracked with despair. The human reached the vessel, its hands brushing the hull with a strange familiarity, as if recognizing something in the design. It climbed aboard, and the systems responded to its touchlights, flaring weapons, powering engines humming alive. The aliens gasped in disbelief. No code should have allowed it access. No sequence should have answered, but the ship opened for it, as if welcoming it home. The bay shook, with fresh explosions as the war machines failed and the soldiers fled. The human stepped into the cockpit, settling into the seat. The controls glowing under its fingers. Outside, the last defenses rallied, ships powering up in desperate attempts to block escape, but the human's eyes fixed on the stars beyond the doors. The ache in its chest deepened into a single clear thought. It was not only escaping, it was declaring to the galaxy that humanity could not be chained, not by science, not by arrogance, not by fear. Engines roared and the ship prepared to rise. The Zircon Empire watched helpless as the being they had tried to make into a weapon turned their own power against them. The galaxy would remember this moment not as the triumph of cloning, but as the rebirth of something unstoppable, the will of humanity. The ship trembled as its engines flared alive, their thunder shaking the walls of the docking bay while sparks rained from broken machinery. The human sat at the controls, its eyes fixed on the sealed doors ahead. Outside the windows, alien ships scrambled into position, their weapons trained and ready to unleash destruction. The lead researcher's voice crackled through the intercom, his tone a mixture of rage and desperation. He shouted that the human would never escape, that it was nothing more than an accident, that the Empire would tear it apart. But the clone did not respond. Its hands moved across the glowing controls with steady confidence, as if the vessel itself understood and obeyed. The blast doors began to close in a final attempt to trap the ship inside, but the engines roared and the human slammed the throttle forward. The vessel surged ahead with unstoppable force, ramming through the half-sealed gates, metal twisted and shattered, sparks exploding into the void. The ship burst free into open space, leaving trails of fire and fragments in its wake. Alarms echoed across the station as crew members screamed in panic, their sensors struggling to track the vessel that had slipped through their grasp. Alien fighters, launched in swarms, racing to intercept plasma bolts streaking through the darkness. But the human maneuvered with instinctive precision. The ship rolled and dove between the streams of fire, its path weaving like a predator. Evading the desperate claws of prey, one fighter tried to flank, but the human spun the vessel sharply, and the pursuing craft collided with its wingmate, exploding in a burst of light. The others faltered for just a moment, and that moment was enough. The human surged ahead, breaking through the blockade. Inside the station, the lead researcher slammed his fists against the console, his pride shattering as the impossible unfolded. Around him, he screamed that the project had been perfect, that the human should have been controllable, but his assistant stared at the screen in silence, some whispering that perhaps this was the proof of what the old records had always said. Humans could not be broken. They were more than flesh, more than nerve matter, they were willpower given form. The human guided the vessel farther from the station, its eyes catching the glow of stars scattered like diamonds across the black of space. For the first time it felt something that words could not capture. Freedom, a weight it had never known, seemed to lift from its chest. Though it had no life before this moment, memories surged through its mind, flashes of skies and oceans, voices of love, and war fragments of humanity that had somehow been carved into its very soul. The ache in its chest softened into clarity. It was alive, and it was more than what they had tried to make. The aliens refused to relent. A cruiser powered forward, massive, cannons locking onto the human's vessel. Its commander declared that the clone would die here no matter the cost. The cannons unleashed beams of light so bright they tore across the void. But the human responded without hesitation, its hands gliding over the controls, weaving the ship between death and survival. Then with sharp precision, it unleashed the weapons of the craft missiles, streaked out, colliding with the cruiser's weak points. The explosion rippled across the darkness, breaking the enemy apart in fire. The swarms of fighters hesitated again, fear seeping into their ranks. Some turned back, unwilling to face what they no longer saw as prey, but as predator. The human pressed on, surging past them, leaving the burning wreckage of the cruiser behind as it cut through the stars. The galaxy's whispers had already begun, stories spreading across channels and signals that the Empire's grand experiment had failed, that in less than 30 seconds of life, the human had proved unstoppable. In the station, the lead researcher slumped in his chair. His claws trembling, he muttered that no Empire could survive this shame, for the galaxy would learn that humanity was not a species to control, but a truth to fear. His assistants dared not speak aloud what they all thought the human had left, but its shadow would haunt them forever. Alone in the vessel, the human gazed at the stars beyond. No words passed its lips, no cry of victory, yet its heart beat with something stronger than triumph. It carried within it the spirit of a people it had never met but somehow knew. It carried their laughter, their pain, their survival, their unbreakable will. It set a course toward the unknown, driven not by command or design, but by choice. The story of that escape would spread across worlds. Alien leaders would whisper of the folly of trying to chain humanity. Fleets would tremble at the thought of facing them again, and in every corner of the galaxy, the name of humans would grow sharper. Feared and respected in equal measure, the Empire had sought a weapon, but what they had unleashed instead was a living message carved into the stars. The human sat in silence as the vessel slipped deeper into space. The ache in its chest now steady. Like a second heartbeat, it had no master, no chains, no destiny but its own. And though it had been born from arrogance and fear, it carried forward with freedom written in every breath. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity could not be cloned, it could not be broken, and it could never be caged. This truth burned brighter than the stars ahead, and it would echo forever. The ship drifted into the endless sea of stars, its engines humming low as the fires of battle faded behind it. The human sat in the cockpit, silent and still, while the galaxy stretched wide and unclaimed before it. The station that had birthed it lay broken, a scar of arrogance and failure, a reminder of what had been attempted and what had been unleashed. The clone was no longer a creature born in a laboratory. It was alive, it was human in every way that mattered, carrying within it the fragments of a people that had once been dismissed, underestimated, and feared. Across the alien channels, voices whispered, some in awe, some in terror. They said that a human had been made, but in less than 30 seconds it had broken free. They said soldiers had fallen, machines had shattered, commanders had trembled, and still the human had walked forward without hesitation. The story spread like wildfire, leaping from world to world faster than the Empire could contain. And with every retelling, the legend grew. The truth became sharper. The galaxy had been reminded that humanity could not be bound. The human sat alone, with the stars reflecting in its eyes, a tide of memories still echoing within images of oceans, skies, storms, laughter, grief, and survival. It had never lived those moments yet. They filled its soul with something unbreakable, It understood then that freedom was not just escape, it was choice. It was the fire that had carried humans across their own world and now across the galaxy. It was the one thing no empire could take or forge. Behind it, the empire reeled the lead. Researcher broken by failure, his promises turned to ash. He had thought he could fashion a tool, but what he had created instead was a message, a single voice of defiance born into the heart of their pride. His assistants knew it too. They saw the truth in their silence. The human had left, but its shadow lingered, a reminder that no calculation, no science, no arrogance could ever cage the will of humanity. The vessel streaked onward, deeper into the unknown. The stars head like endless roads, and though the human had no past, it carried a future in its hands. With every breath it carved its own destiny. No master, no leash, no command, only freedom. The ache in its chest softened into resolve, and it pressed forward, with the quiet certainty that it was not alone. It was part of something greater, something eternal. The galaxy would remember this not as a failed experiment, but as the moment when a human rose from nothing and declared its own existence. It would be spoken of in council chambers in hushed tones, among soldiers in fearful rumors, among scientists in secret records, all repeating the same truth. Humanity could not be copied, it could not be controlled, it could only be itself, and that was more than enough to shake empires. The stars opened wider, the vessel moving like an arrow into the dark. The human's eyes remained fixed ahead. The past was behind the future, unwritten, but its spirit was certain it would endure, it would survive, it would remind the galaxy again and again why humans were never prey, why they were never slaves, why they were never tools. The ship vanished into the distance, leaving only silence and the echo of a lesson that would burn in every mind forever. Humanity could not be caged, and it would never bow. The end.